Now we're all good.
Welcome to the June 25th, 2025 meeting of the Envision Needham Center Project Working Group. As a reminder, this meeting is being broadcast to the town's YouTube channel and also via Zoom. It is being recorded for publication, later viewing, and administrative purposes. I have not been notified that anybody is recording the meeting, but if someone wishes to do so, please notify the chair, which is me. And we will take out roll call attendance. Kevin Keane.
Here.
All good?
Here.
Paula Jacobson.
Here.
Artie Crocker.
Here.
Diane Nanny.
Here.
Jacqueline DeWolf.
Here.
Avery Newton.
Here.
Tim Bolger is present, and Lisa Elson.
Here.
Okay. We also
Who's not here?
who's not here. So who's not here is Paul O'Connor, Michael Grice, Felix Sinell, and Liz Hay is not here, but she said she will be online, so she should be coming in soon. And we also have Karis Lustig and Shane Mark, Gabrielski, and Amy Hilson is also right back there. And the first item for discussion is the minutes from December 10th, January 6th, January 27th, March 3rd, March 10th, and March 24th. Are they acceptable?
I should have brought, were there any minutes where there wasn't a quorum that can't be approved, because it wasn't an official meeting.
Okay.
So I did check into that, and you can approve
That's fine.
notes that are taken from a meeting that does not have a quorum.
So
You're not required to take notes if there's no quorum.
Oh, that's good. Good to know.
Okay.
Any discussion on any of those? Any comments? Did you get any feedback from anybody?
I did not receive any feedback.
I reviewed them, they looked acceptable, they changed the format already, so.
Yeah, I think I was unfortunately not here many meetings, but I can approve it. That's like what's.
Sure. Okay, so then I will accept a motion to approve the minutes where there were a quorum and approve the notes.
So moved.
Second.
So we'll take a roll call vote. Kevin Keane,
Aye.
all good?
Aye.
Paula Jacobson.
Aye.
Artie Crocker.
Aye,
Here we
and the
go.
ones I was here.
Diane Nanny. Jacqueline DeWolf.
Aye.
Avery Newton. Chair votes aye.
And I apologize, Liz just raised her hand, so I'm bringing her in as well.
Hi, Liz, are you there?
Hi, sorry, I'm here.
Did you get a chance to review the minutes? I know you were only present for one of the meetings.
Yeah, yep, I did. I reviewed the minutes. I think my only question was, how do you approve minutes when you didn't have a quorum?
We just.
I'm sorry if I missed that.
Whether or not it's an open meeting, and so technically speaking, when you don't have a quorum, it doesn't meet the open meeting regulations because you're not having enough people to discuss to vote on anything. But
Okay.
you are allowed to take minutes. That's considered like a good practice, but it's not a requirement. But
Okay.
you absolutely can approve minutes where not a quorum of the committee was present.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a motion, Liz, there's a motion on the table to accept the minutes.
Yes,
Okay.
Yep.
And
Just one note, we're not allowed, when there's not a quorum, not allowed to make decisions.
There were no votes taken during that period of time. Yep.
there was one vote taken in one of the minutes.
But with a quorum or without a quorum? With a quorum, yeah.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
When there's no quorum, you're not allowed to take.
Okay. And Lisa,
yes.
the motion passes, the minutes are approved, and the minutes and the notes are approved. And, okay, so then we will get on to the next item, which is to review the committee charge, the revised changes from the select board, and the streets policy.
Yep, so I think we had a couple meetings by the select board between the last time we met and now, in addition to the public feedback session, public hearings. And so I think we thought it would be a good idea, some feedback we got from the select board was to effectively slow the project down, to spend the summer to work on the technical side with APOCs in revising their scope of service, to look more concretely at providing 3 different alternatives for the downtown. The select board, I asked, because I wanted to be very clear about what the request was, And their request was that we have 3 different solutions to be evaluated by the public. So the goal was to get like some concept plans first, and then to get public feedback. So that was sort of the order that they were looking at, which kind of gives us the summer to look at to put together 3 different concept plans. One is, a various iteration of what we currently have presented for a potential pilot implementation. The other is likely going to be a modification of the project that we presented to the select board in 2021, which is sort of the quote unquote do nothing approach. And then we're looking at a 3rd iteration, which would likely be some form of a road diet with more turn lane opportunities within that corridor. So we're looking at all 3 options. The first and second option could include a bike lane, or could simply include parking extensions, could include outdoor dining, could include a whole host of utilizations of that space. So focusing, I think the concept plans will focus more on, I think, the things we heard, which were how much sidewalk is there, how much parking is there, what is the travel time? So one of the things we didn't get before was a traffic study of the current flow of traffic, how long it takes to get from one end to another end of Great Plain Ave, or from any of the other turning motions. And then what would these new design builds be, to try to provide some more data before we get public input, to have some common understanding about what the expectations would be under each of these models.
Well, it sounds like what's missing though is, I don't like, I understand the phrase, but it sounds like what's missing is it's a version where what's changed is try to do something to change the distance between the crosswalks without changing the amount of lanes.
Which you can't do. It's just, we're dealing with the world you can't bend. So
Right.
if you have a certain number of lanes, it's going to be a certain distance to cross.
I understand that, but if you do lose a parking spot, my understanding is that if you want to close up the gap between the distances, that gap, when you're closing up that gap, it's going to require a certain width, let's say, then you lose a parking spot.
But people aren't crossing across parking spaces, 2 lanes of traffic, and parking spots. They're crossing, in this scenario, from a bump out across 4 lanes of traffic. And if you have 4 lanes of traffic, you can only ever cross 4 lanes of traffic. You can't magically make one of them go away.
But they're crossing, I think, more than 4 lanes of traffic, aren't they? They're crossing aren't they crossing partially a parking?
So I should say that the do nothing approach includes bump outs in those areas. So it is still 4 lanes of traffic they're crossing, but they're not crossing beyond the parklets, through the parking. In the existing setup we have, if you look at the pilots that we've done with the Jersey barriers that are currently there, it's the same thing. You're protected in theory by a Jersey barrier for that period of time.
So it isn't a do nothing, there are bump outs to.
It's a do nothing with compliance. Let me put it that way.
It's a bump out to try to shorten the bump outs will shorten the distance from the crosswalks. Is that true?
It will, but you'll still be crossing 4 lanes of traffic in an uncontrolled
The point being
intersection.
is that's what people were concerned about. One of the concern was trying to shorten the distance of the crossing. So we still have 4 lanes, but we are short to the degree possible. We're shortening the distance of where they're crossing by the bump outs.
It gets you across the parking lane.
Yes, correct.
Which is not as vulnerable a spot either way.
Well, I wouldn't say that when you're crossing right at farmhouse, when the right lane is almost part of the parking lane. But still, the point being is people wanted to shorten the distance. The point is people wanted to shorten the distance. Shortening the distance is a bump out. Vulnerable, invulnerable, whatever you want to call it, it's shortening the distance.
Sure.
That's what
So there
people
would be
want.
bump outs. That was in the plan that was presented already in 2021.
So it's not a do, it's not a do nothing.
It's a
plan.
keep
Shortening the
things
distance.
in the same general layout that we currently have, with modifications to make it meet current standards. That's what
Based on the plan that we already have, right? We already have this.
Based on a plan that was developed in 2017 and presented again in 2021. What I will say on the do nothing side though, is it does not address anything in the inner corridor between the 2 traffic signals, because those areas were already redeveloped. So those are fully controlled intersections as far as they have, a 4-way stop everyone has to stop when pedestrians go through. So initially, again, those were not imagined as being modified. Again, Apex is gonna review everything that's there and make sure that it meets modern regulations. So if they see something that's within that corridor that they consider problematic or unsafe, they certainly will flag that for us. So they're not just going to accept the design from 2021. They are going to bring it up to any code changes or any requirements.
But again, I mean, it's important though, it is not a do nothing plan. To be honest with you, it's not a do nothing plan, because the public's gonna hear that, they're literally gonna think it's a do nothing.
I'm using that phrase because that was the phrase used to me, that people wanted a plan that didn't modify the
Yeah,
downtown.
but that's not a phrase I think we should use
Fair.
to make these.
Fair. So there's one with minimal modifications, one with a lot of modifications, and something that's somewhere in the middle. And I think one of the talks we had about the plans is that bike lanes in all three scenarios may or may not be included.
Is there any scenario where you can have basically painted strips for the bikes, but it's not an official bike lane, you're just painting it so when bikes are there, it's sharing part of the driveway. So when bikes are there, just like sometimes maybe happens on roads, when a bike is there, cars will at least have a little bit more flagging that a bike may be there. But it's not an official bike lane.
So I think one of the things we've sort of talked about internally and might be also helpful for kind of a stage resetting is that I think it's really important when we do a project from a public works perspective that we have engineers who provide solutions for us and the public that provides feedback, and not the public providing solutions. Because there's a lot that goes into designing a road and all the various elements of the road. And there's liabilities involved. And if you do something, you know, I've had more than a few people tell me, well, who cares what the MUTCD is, or who cares? And it's like, well, there's a liability associated with that, right? And so one of the reasons we hire an outside firm is because they have liability for designing something. Their stamp that's on it. So I think what we're looking for from the consultant is to come up with these three scenarios. And then we will get public feedback that will help either point us in a direction on all of these scenarios and sort of make modifications, right? So for example, you know, there are things that can be changed and there's things that can't be changed. And like the location of a mid-block crossing has flexibility, right? Whereas, you know, something that requires a signalized intersection doesn't. And so I think it's really helpful in some ways, the way the select board structured it, to have three designs to respond to then say, oh, could you tweak this? Or could you move it to an on-street bike lane? Or could you know, whatever, but whatever the preferences are that come out of those meetings. But it's very hard when our staff keeps on getting feedback about scenarios that can't be executed or don't fit within the right of way, because everything has a downstream repercussion. So I think that's the intent behind getting these layouts for people to respond to. And I think what I heard was that people were frustrated that they were only given one item to respond to. But I take your note on the do nothing comment.
Liz had her hand up. Liz, you still have a comment?
Yeah, I was agreeing with everything that Artie was saying regarding the do nothing. We have to make sure that that does not go out to the public, because that's not the right wording at all. When will the other options be available? When for us to see? I'm assuming we'll see them first before it's then given to the public. So when is that?
I think it was public. So
well, I'm saying like when are they going to be brought to us, and then?
So right now we're renegotiating the scope of service because it was a change in the way we were approaching the project with the Apex. And they're currently working on these three scenarios. I don't anticipate that will happen before September.
Okay, so then I guess going off of that, I'm assuming that after that, I'm just talking timeline right now. So after that, it would be public meetings, focus groups, feedback forums. Is that surveys? Those kind of things will all transpire, yeah?
Yeah, I think it'll probably go to this group first for that first pass through, right? Like the things that look obvious, the things that could be a concern. Yeah. And then, yes, we would talk about the public engagement strategy to get feedback on those three designs. I think with the first goal of narrowing it down to one direction, and then with that one direction, then tweaking that design.
I'm sorry. So we will come up with, out of the three, the one that we want to go with, and then that's the only one we're going to show?
No,
I'm
so
confused.
we'll have all three going to the public, and then
Okay.
they'll give us feedback on the three designs and which direction they want to go in. And then we will talk about which of the one designs we select that will then get tweaked.
Got it.
Right,
Okay.
so it's like, it's not worth it to be like, well, I like,
You don't want to tweak all three if you only.
yeah, it's just not worth
No, no,
spending
no.
money on redesigning,
Correct.
designing.
No, that
three.
makes sense.
Also,
That
don't think
makes
we're necessarily selecting, this committee is not selecting
Recommend.
the
Right.
final, someone else, right, we're making a recommendation possibly, but not selecting what has happened.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
At what point
Okay.
does that to the select board?
So, I mean, I think ideally keeping the select board, and I'll talk to Tim about frequency that we'll meet with the select board, but I think having periodic, maybe depends how fast things go, but quarterly or bi-monthly meetings with the select board, I think in addition to the committee reports, just to provide like a little bit of an update for a specific agenda item, so people are tuned into that. But I think as far as, I think we have to know at minimum what direction of the three we're going in. And then kind of get the select board's feedback on that.
Yeah, present all three, then goes out to public comment.
So would you want to do it where it comes to this committee first to be tweaked?
Yes.
Then it
this
goes to the
committee
select
first,
board
then this
in a
committee.
presentation, not a public hearing?
Yes,
And then it goes to the general public for feedback.
I just have, I know it's kind of down the road, but when we're presenting to the public, I think it's helpful to let them know things we can't do. Because I hear a lot of people say, well, why can't we put a lit
Yeah.
crosswalk here? Why can't you put that in this? I know there's sometimes parameters that make us unable to do those things, but if we could tell them ahead of time, it might help them look at the project with wider eyes as opposed to what they envisioned versus what we can do.
Yeah, and that's actually something Apex is already working on, and they have like a list out of like why you can't use this treatment in this application. Because again, I've heard when I've said like, oh, you can't do this for this reason, it's like, well, who cares if the federal government says you can't do it? And it's like, well. So I think that's very helpful. And there are a lot of different solutions that they've looked in, and it is a difficult set of intersections to design around because of how condensed it is.
And the
So,
train that creates.
the train is its own thing, yeah.
Right, so I,
Well, to that point as well, and sort of already what you were saying earlier, I think having something that's here's what, at the bare minimum, here's what absolutely needs to be adjusted, right? And it's, that can look a lot of different ways, we can take a couple different approaches, but here are like the, key priorities.
but I hear a lot of people say, oh, they just should put a lit crosswalk in front of Camellas, and I'm like, you can't because it's too close to a train track. But then when you say that to someone, they're like, oh, I never thought of that, but
Right. so
that's,
we just
that's
give
their
them
easy
parameters,
solution, so then
yeah.
that makes sense, it's safe, you put a lit crosswalk there, it's safe, but then when you say, oh, well, you can't because it backs the traffic onto the train, like, oh, I never thought, so then.
or it doesn't meet the warrants because it
Right.
doesn't have the flow on the side
But-
streets, yeah.
Then it starts to make sense to them, but initially, that's an easy fix.
And I agree with you. So that is something they're working on to be able to provide, that we can do before September.
I just think that's
That'll help
helpful.
with communication.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thought that I had too, just along with the saying what we can and
Actually,
can't do.
could you say your name?
Shane Mark, Assistant Director of Public Works. One thing that I would suggest the working group committee be aware of, and that we need to set context with things we can and can't do. Because to your point, Artie, is while you could put bump outs and make the distance shorter, yes, it's gonna make the crossing distance shorter. It doesn't necessarily make it safer.
Yeah.
Because it'll make it a shorter crossing, but they still have to cross through 2 lanes of traffic in both directions. So we need to also be aware that we need to provide context that, yes, we can make a shorter crossing, but that doesn't necessarily increase the safety for the pedestrian. And so these are the concerns that Karis has, and that I have, and that our town engineer and our highway director has, is that when we try to engineer ad hoc and not use engineering standards and proven safety, we can't do things. We have to use engineering standards and adhere to federal guidelines and practices. And so I think we just need to be able to provide that context so that when people do bring these comments out, that we explain it to them of why we can't do those things, or why we recommend that we don't use that avenue, because again, making something shorter doesn't necessarily make it safer, and I think sometimes people think shorter crossing and safer crossing, which is not the case.
Certainly one of some of the public comment, I definitely understand what you're saying. That scenario, the exact scenario will dictate whether it's safe or not safe. But one of the public comments was the lights aren't long enough. It's too big of a distance to cross. So that was specifically some of the comments that people were making. They wanted a more time. I don't really understand why myself, but I'm not them. They wanted more time to cross, which means more time or shorter distance. It's one and the same thing. In this particular case, as far as what they're looking for, that's the same thing.
And I would say if we were to maintain 4 lanes of traffic, it is unlikely we would do much to those intersections.
Yeah, but again, if there is a closer distance, it will take less time to cross.
Or we don't allow kitty cornering
Yeah,
either.
that's, yeah, no, diagonal walks are even longer
This
now.
is where are we on the agenda? What type of input or discussion are we?
I would say we're in the reviewing of the,
Select board.
Okay.
Just,
Paul.
yeah, I was gonna say, one of the things that we've, I know that everything has basically gravitated to how many lanes. But this project is a much broader scope than that is. And, you know, all the intensity has been, don't take away our lanes. But the reality is that what we were trying to do is be able to actually really enhance the experience of the downtown. The lanes is one piece of it, but finding every place where we can widen the sidewalks to make them better, nicer treescape. You know, a lot of the drainage things that you've talked about in terms of being able to make it so it doesn't flood in front of French Press, not French Press, because I fixed that one.
Yeah.
But the one that, you know, on Great Plain Avenue. And there are a whole variety of really terrific things that are sort of placemaking that are all part of this concept. And I think we need to be able to start to say, okay, we'll come up with some scenarios for the way the lanes are. But based on that, here are the benefits that you can get based on these different scenarios. Like if you don't touch the lanes, here's sort of the maximum option we can do to be able to widen sidewalks, add more streetscape amenities, make it a more comfortable place, more destination-oriented place where people can sit and be outside, unless it's 103. So, you know.
Today, a lot of people were outside, actually.
Yeah.
I was outside at French Press and it was packed.
Yeah.
Every single table outside.
No, it's true. So it's one of those things where we have so many of those options that are, or opportunities in that area. And I just don't want to see us get bogged down in, you know, this particular thing, which is in essence, very regulation oriented. And where we've got all these other things we can do that will make it really nice in the downtown.
So with the select board, can you clarify like what is our role as a committee? Because it's something like we didn't set the goal. You know, I think there's a lot of confusion about, you know, it's like I joined the committee as like, great, there's an active project in downtown, what can we do, right? There was no plan to respond to, didn't have a scope of work from the grant, started having conversations. The select board had set, you know, goals, consultants brought a plan, which as a committee, we saw the same plan as the public did that public hearing night. There was no backdoor things happening. We were all reacting with everyone else. So I guess what would be helpful based on this, like what, like is our role as a committee, like what is most helpful versus honestly just like checking the box that we get together, we have quorum, check the box, we had a committee. What do you want us to be, or what does the board want us to be thinking about or doing to happen? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an advisory committee, right, by its very nature to the select board. I think the goal is to provide input and get an idea of, you know, I think what direction a project is supposed to take. I think when we started the project and we started the committee, I think we had a pretty specific direction that was given through the process of hiring a consultant and some of the pre-work that was done with the select board. And it became clear through some of the public engagement that that direction may shift.
Yeah.
So and Paul was on the committee, am I right, when we did the original concept?
Yes.
I mean, a lot of it was, I would say aesthetic, but I think a lot of it was aesthetic, right? So I think a lot of it was like, what's the type of lighting fixture that we have? What's the, how much brick do we do versus concrete versus asphalt? I do think a little bit like, what are the picadillos about the downtown that people were looking to resolve? I think at that time it was the traffic patterns through the downtown and how the signals were not coordinated at all at that point. So I don't think it was specifically to provide engineering direction for the project, but I think, again, like what are the hot button items that people were looking for from the project and making sure, I think hopefully some of them get vetted out prior to going to a public process. So that way they're not all happening in a public process. And I think the goal was getting a sampling of the community. So you have all the different needs that are you're looking to be addressed. And again, have those things, at least if there's concerns, they don't come out at the end, they come out sort of in the beginning. But the goal is to sort of provide direction. I think we're looking at a slightly different process now because we're looking at a much more open field as far as like what we're looking at for possible solutions. So I think giving feedback on like what might be missing from the plan, giving feedback on like points of pain that you have in the existing layout or in the proposed layouts. And then again, I think it's like, part of the conversation we just had was in the, I'll call it the minimal approach, right? Do you touch the existing infrastructure that was just updated in 2017, or do you want to tweak that, right? Because I think when we were looking at this in 2021, the thought was we weren't going to make any changes. That was actually the improvement that was made. Yep. And then that changed. So, I think those kinds of things would be the feedback given from this committee to inform the plans that then go to the public. And then I think as we get clearer about what the actual direction is of the project, I think it is really dealing with the specifics, right? Like one of the questions that the select board asked me was, well, which one gets us the most parking? And the answer is every single scenario can have exactly the same amount of parking. Every single one. It's a choice. Do we want parking? Do we want outdoor dining? Do we want parklets? Do we want shade? Do we want, what is it that we want? And then you trade the two off. So I don't think it's like as all or nothing on these scenarios. I think there is a lot of tweaking. You can decide to keep the same layout and take half the parking spaces and do something with them, right? Like that's an option as well. So I think that's what's to give the feedback on, right? It's like, we want to have this many places where you can have outdoor dining. We want to have this sort of trim work that's in between the curb and the sidewalk for placemaking. I think if we end up adjusting curb lines, right, parking meters, and where do they fit in with that design and what do they look like? And I think the last time they did it, it was a Victorian aesthetic was the goal of the downtown. And then literally when we got to the place of design, we were looking at every single component and saying like, I like this parking meter. I don't like this parking meter looks Victorian and this parking meter doesn't, right? And it was that level of information coming in. I also think one of the things, as far as, respective communities that people are coming from is gathering feedback and doing some information giving. So trying to get like constituents isn't exactly the right word, but trying to talk to constituents to get feedback that represents you. And also I think to just provide information to the public as well. So I think those were kind of the main focuses of that initial feedback session.
And
I think Paul, Paul, I think you made a very good.
Liz had her hand up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. And then.
Thanks. So I'm obviously on the board as a business representative. So one of the things that I heard, I think, through the select board meetings, as well as I know something that has been thrown out in this group as well, is what's happening with an economic vitality study in terms of how these three plans are going to affect businesses. Like, where are we with that?
So when it was discussed, I believe at the select board at the time, we hadn't talked about adding an additional component to the project of economic vitality. I think we'll have to continue to discuss that and figure out how that can be, if and how it should be added to the project. But I know I asked the question specifically as part of the conversation I had with the select board, and at the time, I think the focus was more on trying to get 3 concepts, looking at the composition of the committee and looking at the revised charge of the committee that was added in. So I think maybe it could be an agenda item in this group is like, what do we want to do? What would it look like? What would something like that, cost, and how does that get added to the project?
Yeah, that was not within the, it was so clear that's not within the scope of this pot of money. So that would have to be another pot of money.
Okay, well, if I can
But you
request
said-
that that's something that's put on our agenda, maybe for it next month or the following month, because I think it's extremely important.
And I think the point in that too is that there is probably a lot of information that we can gather about what people believe would improve economic vitality. Obviously, business owners and so on, just to give us a feel for what are the kinds of things that you think would actually spur that. And so, without having to hire a consultant and be able to do an entire study for it, that I think initially, especially to be able to help us, envision a more clear perspective on what would really, revitalize the downtown, in all considerations, that we start to make a list of these things that people have said, well, if we had this kind of thing, this would benefit my business. If we had this kind of thing, it would make more people hang out in the downtown more often. Those kind of things. We had some of those discussions back in 2017. And that's why some of the little places where there's seating and those kinds of things were designed into it, because there was more of trying to be able to have people spend a little more time. But of course, that only did a very narrow piece right in the middle, and the next phases were to go right and left. And now we're sort of in the right and left phase of being able to put the rest of it back together again. But yeah, I think getting clear on things like the signal controls, those are things that we could make changes with probably relatively rapidly, and they could be implementing soon, right? I mean, we already know that we can that there's an ability now to be able to control both segments of lights so that they actually talk to each other. And if there are ways of it to be able to use some of the, if there's technology to be able to allow it to actually sense whether they're, even though it's in a cycle, realize there are no cars sitting at the other side, so we can change the light and let the next, piece through. If that technology is available, those are things that would make people's lives feel better and benefit in terms of throughput and so on. So even if you don't change the lanes, there are still positive things we can add through technology to be able to speed up the experience, but do it safely. Because just because you're changing the rotation doesn't mean that you're creating a more hazard. A hazard, you're just allowing people to cycle more often.
And I know we also talked about potentially redoing the parking study that was done back in
2023, I think.
Yeah, 2023.
Yeah, I think, I know, and Tom, I think he's online, I'll double check. Our town engineer is doing a little bit of work this summer, again, it's not a full-blown parking study, but I think just sort of looking at the conclusions from the existing study and going and field verifying it. So we are doing that, but again, we don't have a budgeted amount right now for a full-blown parking study. I do believe that the planning board is doing maybe Artie, you could speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we're looking to doing some type of update in our parking study. We are looking at that. Not doing right now, not certainly have.
I know they're looking at like parking
but we have the money
requirements.
in that.
I know they're looking at parking requirements because we have a standardized requirement. Virtually every business gets a waiver, right? And so the question is, do we have the right regulation? If every single business is looking for a waiver, it's probably not a great
Wait, the
regulation.
last one was done in 2023,
Yes.
and is there a feeling like it needs to be updated? And that's pretty recent.
I think what I've been hearing from the public is they have concerns about the validity of it. That's what I have heard.
Is it worth is there worth like some sort of summary coming or findings coming back to this committee? I mean, you probably have like a final presentation from it. I feel
Yeah.
like
Great.
but it's just another
So if you want
thing,
to digest.
rather than doing
Yeah.
the work, just resending it out to this group.
Yep.
I can find it online too, but that would be helpful.
I mean, to some extent, I mean, the basic summary was that parking study was, there's not parking, people just don't know where it is.
That was
Totally.
There was a
Yeah.
few different things, maybe Amy, because I know you were
Something.
intimately involved with it, but I think the peak parking was like at 6 o'clock on a Friday. And we have parking, but some of it is in private hands and not in public hands. And it's being underutilized at the times where there's the greatest
And the
peak.
signage is bad.
And
The signage is bad, that's also
Yeah.
a fair comment.
And even signs within the town directing people to where public parking is, like, I know over by Michelson's, there's a sign that says public parking straight ahead. But then it never tells you.
Yeah.
Where to
that's-
go?
Yeah, straight ahead to where, there's
Yeah.
a follow-up.
You're
there's
driving
no-
all the way
there are
through
no
Needham and it
follow-up
doesn't tell you where you're
signs.
supposed to go.
That's right, follow-up signs.
Because I
aren't
want,
there.
I did,
Yeah.
I was
Just
like,
keep
okay, there's
driving
a
it.
sign, I'm gonna see
Yeah.
what happens. And
It's
it
in
never
depth.
tells me where I'm supposed to go.
Just keep going. Yeah.
So I think this.
Just to expand, Shane Mark again, Assistant Director of Public Works. Just to expand upon what Kara said is the feedback that we heard from the public on the parking study was that when the parking study, the dates that they did the actual studies for the parking study was in the middle of COVID, and now that we're out of COVID,
That's
that the
Yeah.
belief is that that parking study results don't necessarily reflect today's volume and usage of the lots.
Okay.
Oh, it's
And so
not
that
from
was-
2023 then?
So that
It's
was. the push-
2022 was when they did it.
So that was the
Data
pushback
collection?
is that when they did the data collection, it was like a year and a half, 2 years into COVID, or 3 years out of it, so it's not, the belief is that that may not be reflective of the current condition of parking in the town center.
And that can be true, because I know I park behind the, Needham Bank, because I have a permit to park there. But until about 6 months ago, I could show up at any time of the day and there'd be a spot there. Now that more people are being forced to go back to work, there's like 1 or 2 spots after 9:30, not half a lot.
No, and another thing actually was part of that. We actually, Revitalization Trust Fund talked about being able to do a banner at the corner of Garden Street and,
Yeah.
right there at the bank. That would be for public parking. But the problem is that that lot is only public parking after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So trying to be able to get that message to the people, even if we even designed a banner that said that on the banner.
Yeah.
But the feedback was, people are just gonna go there, they're gonna think that they've got public parking, then they're gonna find out that it's not, or they get ticketed, and then they're gonna be angry. So it didn't get implemented because it was a
Okay.
difficult thing to convey,
Right.
even though it's available after 2 o'clock, which is really the time when a lot of people could take
Right.
advantage of it. if
And
they
it's
were coming
available
in
on
for-
weekends too.
Yes,
so
and weekends,
On the weekends, it's an empty lot.
yeah.
So,
So those are some of the complexities of trying to be able to,
yeah.
convey the information
No
to the public.
parking, 8 AM to
I know.
1 to 2.
Right, because
It's
because
just the
signs-
opposite.
And what's interesting is the sign there is confusing because it says it's permit parking 8 to 2, but it never says you can park publicly
Public.
after 2. So then it says what happens after 2. And then even one of my employees on their first day, she's like, does that mean after 2 o'clock I can't park there anymore? And I'm like, no, you're fine. Like, it just means after 2, the public can park there. But she thought after 2 o'clock she was gonna have to move her car.
But that's actually an interesting point. One of the things that we, obviously could potentially look at is adding on to the sign that's there that just says public parking only after 2 o'clock.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
And
and,
weekends.
so, yeah, and that way anybody pulls in the lot gets it.
One of
And
the
they
comments, at the
Question.
select board hearing was that people were somewhat offended that we mentioned this, that the signs are confusing because they understood it well and thought that that was insulting. So just like, keep that in mind. Can Tom do like a check on like that study and just kind of
Yeah, so
present
we
like
have
an informal, not like a whole thing, but like, some data
What we can
basically to
take
either
away from
confirm it
it.
or say that it looks a little different than it was at the time and just like a small presentation.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. As I say, towards the end of the summer.
probably even maybe like September or something, or maybe this year. Better time for him to check that.
Will this, I'm sorry, I know we're talking a lot about lots. Are you also considering, I mean, the majority of businesses that are, you know, upset about this plan is because we're losing parking in front of our businesses. So I understand that you guys are talking a lot about the lots, and I appreciate that. But really it's the parking that's getting lost in front of the businesses that is going to affect the businesses the most, especially for businesses that have elderly clients that are coming in that just need to pull in, park, run in and run out. You know, I'm just like, is this parking study accounting for the parking spots in front of our businesses? That is
Yeah,
going
I
to be
mean,
done.
I think there's sort of two questions that are there, right? One is how much parking is there versus how many cars? And I think the second question that you have is the location of those spots as in proximity to various businesses and the impact that it will have on those businesses. I think as I mentioned in the concept plans and when we talked with Apex, all three possible options that they will design can have a variation in which there's no parking loss. Or I think it's like 3 parking losses, and that's just to meet ADA requirements. So it's not even, we'd have to do that anyways. Or as a committee, as a community, as a select board could say, well, in this area, we're outdoor dining, so we want less parking in this area, right? I think that's the trade-off between the two items that can be made, sort of made flexibly throughout all 3 of the projects. So one of the things we had talked about when Apex comes up with the 3 designs is to make it so that you can either maximize parking for each design or change it if you want for a different utilization. One of the things we talked about earlier in the committee was some physical shifts in the right of way, so chicanes. So if you had some bump out sort of on either side that sort of gave the appearance that there's a turn in the road, visually people tend to drive slower through those areas and pay attention more to pedestrians and everything else. But to do that, you do have to modify the parking plan, right? So that was something that was taken off the table. You could do that again on any 3 of these scenarios. It's just where do you, so I think we'll have to be very clear when we present this to the public, because I think that was something that got lost, was that there isn't a requirement to lose parking in any of these scenarios, that there can be trade-offs to be made if additional amenities want to be added. And I think I'll have to lean on you, Liz, a little bit on how to do that in the most context-sensitive perspective, because you're building a design that is modular, and how do you make it clear that like you could make a change, not that you have to make a change.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if the 3 plans that come over to us don't lose any on-street parking, we'll be in a better place. I'll just say that. So we don't want to lose any on-street parking, period.
Yep. And I will say the town engineer is looking specifically at on-street parking as well and utilization of on-street parking.
Okay. And I when I say no, not losing any on-street parking, I mean, I understand that there are certain spots that we do need to lose for ADA compliance. So I understand that. I'm saying anything above and beyond that.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think Paul, kind of hits, in some ways kind of hits the nail on the head, and that is, this is, especially the vitality of the town, and obviously that means it isn't just the businesses, it's the, people within the town itself and walking there and biking there and driving there, but it is highly related to the businesses themselves and how it affects them and what we can do to help them. And so, what can we do, which increases their vitality, but minimizes any negative effects of that occurring. One thing is you're talking about where do we have spaces, what can we do to, eating here, sitting there, and so forth. And the one thing that's kind of interesting is that with the slip lane, whatever it's called, in front of that slip lane. Hey, I use it, I love it, but I particularly don't care if it's gone or not gone. So we're looking at where are the pros and cons of everything going on. There's already the Sweet Basil is already using a couple of spots there. Then we have that whole corner right there is just one big sitting area, so forth. And that has, I guess I'll say, it has extremely negligible effect on anything. I don't think it has any negative effect on businesses whatsoever, actually. And so, but again, getting back to what Paul says, what can we, what was the goal? What can we do to improve what's going on there? Without necessarily getting into, what colors the parking here, is it Victorian or whatever? What can we do to change something there, which really does have a benefit, which doesn't take away the focus being the vitality of the businesses, and again, what they want or what they don't want. Again, we all know that there's some things that people want, which is simply not possible. But what do they want? We know in general what they want is more money. We know that. But what else do they want? If there's some spots which have to be taken away related to the handicapped aspect of it, and we have to take away, what that also means is that probably also means is that this is some additional space there that can be used for something else. Because we're not losing that whole spot for that handicap. We're losing the spot because mathematically it doesn't work, which means we have to lose that spot, which means that part of that spot can be used for something else. So what can we do which fits the bump out minimal legal requirement of what we have to do, and what does it give us? What does the slip link give us? What can we do?
And I think one thing we may also want to talk about, if I'll talk more with the town manager and the select board about, economic development's not under my purview, so I'll find out, leave it to the subject matter experts that's where they are, on what that study looks like, because I think you can kind of take two approaches when you look at economic vitality, and one is the existing institutions that are there and how do they benefit, and the other is how do you get the most amount of revenue from that area. And I think those are actually two different questions, and I think we just have to be clear on what question is we're asking.
So just building on, I was gonna say that too, just like, maybe that's what we can all discuss as a committee and our diverse perspectives too, like what is it? Because it's existing, but there's something where there's a lot of people say like, oh, I wish I could want to spend more time in Needham Center, but should you choose to go to another town to walk around or do my shopping or whatever, with their families for different reasons. So it's the kind of the perspective demand versus current, which is always the struggle. The only other thing I would just ask is, you were talking about those 3 options and giving direction to the consultants. It's something that I brought up early on, and I just want it again for public record, that not to give you all the solution. I totally understand that, but as a problem, an uncontrolled 4-lane pedestrian crossing is just I just really hope that the town, I don't know what information or education or studies we all need, but there are so many solutions. I'm not going to prescribe which one. It's actually not just curb bump outs. There's many other solutions. So I'm not going to prescribe that, but as a committee, and I'm here just as an individual resident, but this is where I will say okay, I've been working on roadway safety issues as a professional for nearly 2 decades, and we just know that that's just a major issue. So one is, even if we do this minor modification, that as a baseline, we just don't put back in, or we don't accept that there's a 4-lane uncontrolled as a pain point. Then from there, at least have the consultants solve what are all the options. And then the second one is the slip lane. Again, because it's uncontrolled, it actually is a major threat, because as you're waiting, no one has visibility. So it's a problem for people driving. I know as a driver, I don't want to hit someone, and as a person who crosses. So just something I want on the record again, that as a pain point, we ask the consultants that even if it's this minor modification, that we don't put in a 4-lane uncontrolled crosswalk.
Yeah, and I think that is exactly what Apex will be looking at when they look at the initial design.
Yeah.
And I know it won't be 100% exactly what we had presented in 2021. They will absolutely be looking at it from that perspective to see what can they do. I just know that because they had crosswalk boxes in those intersections, which were.
They actually had nothing. That the 4-lane uncontrolled, the sidewalks were, even the curb cuts were in the same exact.
They were Apex and they were doing boxes.
Data.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm just responding to the Artie's comment too, but
Yeah.
you said no change.
Yeah, so no, they will be reviewing that. Again, I think
So maybe it's the
The-
minor
the-
modification is a better.
Yeah,
use.
what is it?
But I think this group can help,
Yeah.
like from a pain point perspective and hearing all the public input, what are the pain points that we want to make sure we're solving for, knowing that for any one of these pain points, there are multiple solutions across all of these issues.
May I ask you a question? You
Yeah.
said the uncontrolled, so for example, and I know there's some spots we can't do it, but for example, at Pickering and Great Plains, so the House of Pizza area,
Mhm.
so that, I'm not trying to engineer it. Not trying to do that, I'm trying to give ideas.
So you're trying,
But
yeah,
so
but
for
focus on the problem.
But for example,
Yeah.
that spot, that may be able to have maybe some type of flashlight or something.
So RFBs are not considered a control
Yeah.
device.
Okay, well,
What's
that
an
can say control.
The
but-
little button that you push and it's the
Right.
yellow flashing lights.
Okay,
It's just enhancing what's already
It's
there.
just,
It's not its
the
own
same
thing.
issue where like things might feel like it's safer when it's not actually
So
safer.
sometimes it's better not to make it feel like it's safe, because then
Right.
people be more
Then
careful.
people don't pay
Yes, correct,
attention, yeah.
yes.
Well, people be more
Correct.
careful. Because I
Like, I'll give you
certainly, I
another-
certainly agree, yeah.
I'll give you another
Yeah,
example, like putting painted bike lanes on the road where cars can go 60 miles per hour
Yeah.
on some roads, not Needham, this has nothing to do with
No, they
Needham.
never.
No, it's true, no, it's just not, it's just, yeah, so it's just, there's certain things where it sounds nice, or it feels like it could be better, but from research and from studies and from crashes, we just know it.
It's not advisable.
Or you end up presenting like, it could make it like 1%, like marginally better from like this research study, and those are the things we should be informed with to know, do we feel comfortable saying, giving that input.
So just on that point, so I guess that shifts to part of the charge for Apex, which is bringing up more of these types of things that that are available solutions and do fit compliance, so that people can understand what seems to fit Needham and our particular situation.
Yeah, compliance is different though than meeting like safety standards and sadly in our country. So there's
but
things that are like compliant that aren't necessarily making
things safe.
safer.
So I'm sorry, can I just, I'm not there, but I'm asking this because maybe I'm a little confused. Jackie, are you saying that you don't want one of the options to be a 4-lane option?
No, I'm saying I don't want a pedestrian crosswalk where there are 4 lanes and there's no other
Control.
something.
Yeah.
I can give lots of ideas, but I don't want to
Yeah.
give solutions.
So
Okay, but one of the options one of the things that the select board said was that you need to give us a 4-lane solution, 4-lane option.
I think since you don't want to give any solutions, I will give a potential solution.
Okay, you're an engineer.
Not an engineer, but I play one on TV. I think like one thing would be a refuge
A
medium, right?
refuge medium, yeah.
So you could have something that is built out in the middle that a person could cross 2 lanes,
Yes.
stop, be somewhat protected, and then cross 2 additional lanes.
Isn't that what
Um,
happens in the slip lane, basically?
Yeah.
Where people
Yeah.
get stranded. in
No,
that?
because you have
I've
an
been
angle
stranded
there
in
as opposed to a straightaway.
No, the slip lane is a different issue. The slip lane is the fact that when you're waiting to cross, you have like 0 visibility. No one has visibility, a person walking and a person driving.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Because you have to completely like make the turn. You're turning at a point where you have to accelerate as a driver, right where someone could be stepping into the crosswalk.
Mhm.
So that's like a visibility.
Where this is like a little island and everybody can see everybody.
And then once you're in the island, then you hit the pedestrian button and you cross. So that is a refuge island in effect, because you have to like make two motions.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I'm saying there are solutions where you can keep 4 lanes and add and make it safer. There's just trade-offs to acknowledge in those moments too. Or you have pinch points where you condense it down and it reopens up, you condense down. I mean, there's just trade-offs. There's lots of trade-offs. I don't want to offer a solution because I totally, understand that. It's just as a pain point, how do we make sure that
We want to make it as safe as possible and still comply.
And I don't know, there's no like, there's no like ranking as far as like, there's no grading. like we have grading for intersections, right? So there's a successful intersection from a car traffic management perspective and an unsuccessful intersection. But there's no like, again, we're gonna get 3 concept plans and there's no, it's a little bit, there's no like assignment to it where you'd be like, this is a level 1 safety road or a level 2 safety road. So I just want to be clear about that there's no like specificity that will say that like the consultant will tell us. I mean, I think one of the things we're gonna be looking for is like trying to get people to drive calmer through the downtown. So I think like the word, I was talking about this in another one, but congestion versus calming. Like the goal is to get people to go slower through the town center with less interruption. So one of the things that like, there's just no way of saying like, well, this lane is safe. Like we'll say what has more, I guess priority might be the best way. Like this is like more car throughput. This is more sidewalk space for whatever, selling things or, you know, having outdoor dining. This one has this, and we'll just have to be clear like what each plan offers, I guess.
Yeah.
And I think what you're saying is, and Apex will be modifying them. So I know that that will be at least unidirectional crosswalks will be part of that. In modifying that, like, where are the trade-offs in each plan? Because in each plan you're getting something and in each plan you're losing something, and it's just what that thing is.
So that could be a measure too, where you look at individual items, yeah, and measure it based on success of like individual different perspectives. Because I think a lot of these things can be true. What I'm finding in conversations I'm having is like all can be true at once, right? It's like lots of businesses want and need their on-street parking and loading zone, and their customers only ever will come by driving because of the nature of the business. And there's lots of businesses where people want to walk and bike. And like today, it's interesting you brought up the heat wave. I was at French press between 10:30 and 11:30 a.m. This is one anecdote. It was fascinating. There was 6 empty seats inside, and every single seat outside was full. And me and my friend chose to sit outside. There was also umbrellas and shade, but you know what I mean? It's just like, it is fascinating, but all of this can be true, right? People can say, I'll never sit outside today. And that's true. And a lot of people say like, I'll never bike. And a lot of people will say, I would love to be able to. So like, some of this is like, and, you know, this and that. And, you know, that's where we have to, you know, figure it out.
Yeah, so actually, I think what you just said was really interesting as far as going back to the consultant on what are those metrics, like the timing it takes to get through the downtown, the number of parking spaces, the accessibility of crossing from one side to the other as a pedestrian, like, and maybe that's the next time we meet is developing what those metrics are to help then understand what the trade-offs are in all 3 scenarios.
Because I was saying last meeting, like, we can never re-rank the priorities. I don't think we'll ever, even as a small committee, come to a consensus. So how could we expect that if like a whole town, right, is to rank one thing over the other? So you take them individually and then you say, how does this plan on all these individual metrics do? So then you can start to say, we're picking these 4 metrics over these 3, but we don't have to choose like the YMCA matters more than the park, like.
But it does. I couldn't resist.
Good one, no, I'm glad you said that. Well, then I'd say that about the pedestrian
There you
safety,
go.
right? So I'd say like never less
There you
than,
go.
and
There you
it's like, please. But then let's have that debate, you know, it's like, great,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Oh,
I just don't think we've given a space where we've been able to have that discussion and debate, but maybe with the 3 alternatives, it'll finally give us that space to have that.
Well, that'll let us be a little bit more
Discussion.
concrete, start to move forward,
Right.
because like we're still kind of in ideating, which is
Yeah.
good, like, it's important to sort of like throw everything at the wall, see what sticks, but I think once we have
Yeah,
more concrete, whether it's metrics or criteria, however we want to define it, I think that'll be like, okay, here's the standard that we're gonna hold it to across all these different priorities, and that we can actually evaluate something, you know, with intentionality.
Now, Karis, I know some of the sidewalks need to be widened because they are no longer compliant. Do you know when those sidewalks meet the current compliant, will that then make them wide enough for businesses to put tables out for like a sidewalk sale or is that gonna require additional?
That's where the additional space comes in. And that's why when we talked with Apex about what to look at, from a sensitivity perspective said, at this moment in time, let's not focus on bike lanes as a requirement and let's focus on space, right? So I talked about this before about curb, people space and car space. And then let's figure out how we're gonna use the people space and car space later, because I think there are people who would like that space for other things other than bikes potentially, right? And I think that's what you're specifically
Yeah, I
talking
just
about.
wasn't sure, like, I know as a community, the businesses have talked about, wouldn't it be great
Yeah.
if we could? And I didn't know if the sidewalks met the standard. Would it be just, now we are wide enough to do those sidewalk sales, or would I have to then say to you, oh, well, I still want another 2 feet because now I want to do my sidewalk sale?
Yeah, so if we made them to the standard, they would not be, because whatever you put in the right of way would make the pitch point more. But I think that that's a good, like, a thing that, again, we could put in that metric of like, does it make the select board right now also doesn't have a policy that allows it. So I think that's potentially another thing to discuss here. And is that a recommendation? But if they were to allow it, right, like one of the reasons why I think it hasn't come up is we just don't have the space to allow it.
Right.
But if we did have the space to allow it, what would that
But
policy
I'm not
decision
even
be?
talking about doing it on a regular basis. Like, I know we no longer do our Mayfair
Yeah,
downtown. But if the sidewalk for one Saturday could be utilized for businesses to create a Mayfair event that ran from this end of town to this end of town, with the town common being a central location where there was more activity going on, wouldn't that be great to create a strollable? But I want to make sure that when we're looking at that change, is that something that's gonna?
yeah, I think that would be a good thing to include. And again, I don't think either design precludes it. It's just, if you do a design that has more travel lanes, then you have to take parking in order to add sidewalk, right? Whereas
I just wasn't sure how much more sidewalk needed to be added, like, we're talking about 2 inches, or we're talking about 3 feet, you know, like
I think it's more than 2 inches.
like, I just don't know, so I'm like, I'm gonna ask the question.
The sidewalks right now in certain sections are narrow, and I think one of the things we even talked about was, even if you continue the same practice we have now of not allowing bikes in the downtown, it's still, there's not even enough right now. Even the plan that doesn't make major modifications does widen the sidewalk somewhat. There's not a lot of space to even just walk a bike through the downtown, right? In certain areas of the towns, with the congestion there. So I think, again, maybe like sidewalk congestion or something like that could be an item, opportunity to add shade, because I think, again, you mentioned like it's more comfortable to be outside when there's shade versus when there isn't. So I think developing a list of metrics to then like evaluate all 3 concepts would be really helpful on what the trade-offs are.
Is the select board,
Sorry, just the sidewalk width, it sounds like that's sort of one of the non-negotiables that, you know, we were talking about earlier, like, here's what, you know, it definitely needs to happen, definitely should, you know, that's, if the sidewalks need to be widened, great, let's just get ADA compliant, parking spaces, like, there are a couple of things that are like truly, I don't know if non-negotiables is the
Right.
best word for it, but like,
A must.
where's the starting, exactly,
Right,
like,
they
here's
are.
the starting place, the starting point.
And I just wasn't sure if when we got to the must be widened, would that then made it wide enough to do other things, or if it was just still not quite wide enough to do those additional.
I think, and I apologize before I spoke too soon, I think we have to look at the plan, because it probably also depends where you are.
Okay.
I think there were certain parts that got a lot more sidewalk and certain parts of town that didn't, just based on the configuration of where the center line was, and where there was additional space to move that.
so I just bring it to, I had no idea there was no ordinance. You can't do business on the sidewalk in Needham.
No
So-
A-frames and stuff like that, right?
You're not allowed to sell anything on the sidewalk.
So I don't know if the select board's like open to hearing changes as part of this, but I know as just a resident, I would love to hear from the business members on this committee of like totally beyond design, like what ordinance are out there that you care about or know about. Because I think that, to me, that's like, as a resident, that's fascinating, because I would sit here being like, great, economic vitality, like, broaden those sidewalks, like, bring the businesses, and then we would do all this and be like, no, it's not allowed. I'd be like, wait, what? Like, as a resident, because that's.
Kevin, there's no A-frames allowed.
Is.
You can have there's like a very specific regulation about the A-frames.
A-frames are out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they're not allowed to have like neon color. They're like very specific regulations about them, but you're not, like, technically, when COVID hit, people did a lot of placemaking outdoors and the
Yeah.
rules got bent. And there are like planter boxes, for example, that have been installed on the public way that are business owned. Technically speaking, they're not permitted under our current regulation. We don't allow commerce in the, like I said, in the right of way. I do think that was what we were hoping and continue to hope to hear back from businesses, restaurants, everything else is like, in all three scenarios, how would they like to use the space to advantage them?
Okay, that would be like
Thank you.
super helpful as then as a resident too, to hear from the businesses. Because I think sometimes even as a resident, I infer that like, great, there'd be more outdoor business or there'd be more this. And just like having more perspective on that would be really helpful.
Yeah. That'd be the next.
Like French Press is in a very unique situation because they own
They own
a vast majority of their sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's not in the right of way.
Like when they
So
break
it's
out that
confusing if
land,
you're a
it's on-
resident because you don't
But
know
they
what the
also
town
get
owns and
parking.
doesn't.
Public
Yes,
parking.
yeah, so they rent that from the town, but the veranda that they have
They're paying.
outside as well.
No, I know that.
Yeah,
So, but yes, but that's what, they are in a unique situation.
That's right.
But I think, but some people infer that like, great, if you could have more of that for more of the businesses, wouldn't that be a good thing?
Well, and look at all the spaces that are taken up at, you know, in front of Sweet Basil. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a substantial amount of spaces that have been taken up, but people haven't been upset about it. Because they love being able to sit out at Sweet Basil, and he's put up these pretty trees and, I mean, it's.
So I think
But the
again,
so I guess it just goes
yeah.
back to the ordinance
Yeah.
thing, like
Yeah.
if there's ordinances
can we
that.
say specific to the utilization of the right of way?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of ordinances that they may have.
Oh, sorry,
Yeah.
the utilization of the right
Yeah,
of way
yeah.
and
Yeah.
activating it so that when we're making decisions about the space, we actually know or have a plan for how to activate it, because then if you can't activate it, it also
Why did we do it?
feels funny, but that's like the bike lane, I'll just say as someone who bikes, and I know I've identified myself as a biker through this process at times, like for me, then it becomes like, great, if there's no separated bike lane, then what about the ordinance that does allow you to bike on the sidewalk? Because
Right.
my 5 and 7-year-old, I'll never, ever go on the street with them, versus, oh, you do chicanes, you slow it down, you have bumps, it's, everyone's driving 10 miles per hour, no problem, you know, so like there's trade-offs to all of these things where there's like multiple solutions, both programmatically, ordinance and space. It'd be great to like have the outcome be, we're making these decisions, but it has to come with some of these other policy changes so that it's like comprehensive.
And I think as to like the parklets goes too, if we go with the minimal change solution, do you build parklets into the built environment or do you continue doing them on a modular basis? Because there's challenges either way.
So Karis, the question along that conversation would be then, when we update the select board on the progress, the next time we update, should at that time we get some guidance from the select board on whether or not we should make recommendations from the working group on potential bylaw changes that wowould help enhance and utilize, potentially help enhance the businesses to utilize the public space. Because right now, that's not a charge from the select board, so I guess we'll go back to update. Should we say, hey, one of the things that came out of the working group is a potential to look at these and make some potential recommendations of bylaw changes that go in conjunction with whatever the project ends up being, or how that looks.
Paul, I'll challenge your memory a tiny bit. I know the sidewalk, particularly in front of Sweet Basil in the original design, was significantly wider and would have allowed on-street dining as an option. And at that time, we had no regulations about on-street dining because this was all pre-COVID. Do you know if that was part of the conversation at all? I'm really challenging your memory here, and I can talk to Tom and see if he knows as well.
I've
but-
read the minutes and I didn't see anything.
Yeah, I don't remember the discussion. No, I don't remember any discussion specifically about that. And because that was one of those things where, and I think maybe the reason it didn't go anywhere was because pre-COVID, and even actually pre the work that was done with French Press, you know, that was basically the first outdoor dining piece that we worked on. And at that point, just from the history point, that we had proposed a parklet or be on the sidewalk, because he has a really wide sidewalk, and because he had the zone where they own much of what appears to be the sidewalk there. And so one way we had to fall back on the other. the select board at the time wasn't comfortable doing a parklet. Now, this is 2019.
Mm.
But they were comfortable allowing them to be able to do outdoor dining on that
Yeah.
other segment. But that opened the door to the, how parklets are designed, all that kind of stuff. Prior to that, there really was not any serious discussion about being able to do that. And that's also we're looking at the expansion that happened with the James.
Mm.
And the original one that we had mapped out was much smaller. And when COVID came in, it expanded,
Yeah,
but it's
right.
like a totally awesome place now. I
Yeah.
mean, like, those are the kinds of things that if we can, I think that we have the opportunity to leverage a lot of positive things out of this committee's, discussions and interactions to get a number of these things, including some of these antiquated regulations where basically the town knows that people want to do that, but it's still in the books. So we just ignore it and, and don't
And I think the
enforce it.
I think the narrow sidewalk is a challenge to navigate. That's sort of, you've never had sort of like a cart and a horse thing. And it's like, well, why change it if you don't have space? Or, again, it's the equitability of it, right? If some of the downtown is not wide enough and this store can't, but this store can. So I think those are the challenges, but I think certainly we can put that on our agenda the next time we talk.
One other thing.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry, yeah.
Okay,
No, no.
Just to clarify, so there's a comment about that the fact that there's some parking spaces taken up because the parklets now and we're losing the parking and maybe people are miss them, remembering that those are in front of stores that are benefiting from those. So then the store's not going to complain or not going to miss them per se. But I did have a question. This is again, I'm going to preface all my comments by, I'm not trying to engineer it. The question is this, for example, I'm not talking the sidewalk right near the train tracks, but the one again in front of House of Pizza, can that be a raised sidewalk? Slowing that calming.
Crosswalk?
Yeah, can that be a calm?
No, so I actually found the Federal
Because
Highway
it's
Administration,
full-
because it's for,
Okay, so it can't be. raised. Okay,
it's not
Okay,
permitted.
okay,
Yep.
okay, thank you.
I guess I would just say, like, the bylaw changes, we should make that easier regardless of whether or not we're gonna change the street. Like, if we
Yeah,
could, and if we could do it now, so that maybe, people were able to like put things out in the street, it might help change kind of.
So my only
now.
I hear you. My
Yeah.
only concern about that is if you haven't widened the sidewalks first, there's really no space for them to put anything. It's the
Yeah.
chicken and egg thing.
But it's
But if
also
there's-
in some places you can,
Yeah,
because you do have a wider
Yeah.
side, but other places you don't. Like if you're on the side where,
UPS.
Needham Music is and UPS and so on, those sidewalks are really narrow and slopes, So being able to get those wider is almost a requirement no matter what we do, because if you don't get that wider, it's a whole pinch point you can't even have two people easily pass each other walking on the sidewalk in that particular area. Now you go to the other side of the street and there's a great deal of space.
Yeah.
So, and that's why you can have the chairs outside and people sitting there and still people can walk by because, it doesn't interfere with that. So and I think that's one of the challenges is, how do you make that sidewalk wide enough so that it's at least passable for pedestrians, but not eliminate the parking places?
Is the other sidewalk on the other side, all public, or is that part of that sidewalk owned by the businesses?
The vast majority of Great Plain Ave, it's right up to the doorstep.
Mhm.
So it's very tight in that particular corridor, the right of way.
I guess, make sure we're near as clear. So the sidewalk on the Sweet Basil side, that whole sidewalk is public.
Correct.
Okay, so public, narrower, wider. Okay.
Yeah.
Just wanted to-
So I think we've gone through that, right, the charge. I'm just comfortable with it. The complete streets policy, do you want to just briefly touch on it, because we're over 17 minutes on the hour meeting, which is.
Yeah, I think, so again, the complete streets policy that the town wrote was, formulaic, right? It's not the idea that it's a one size fits all solution and that you have to do all the things in all the spaces. But I think the goal is that for all the projects we do, whether it's in the downtown or in any other neighborhood, we just look at all modalities that we have. And that's everything from looking at semi trucks going down that corridor to pedestrians, and making sure that we can accommodate all the users that we're supposed to have in that area. And I think as maybe Jackie, you were sort of alluding to, when Apex looks at these 3 designs, all 3 of them, the goal is to look at that complete streets policy and making sure that we're trying to address those modalities in the best way possible. I think a great example would be like Dedham, for example. We couldn't fit a bike lane on both sides of the road without making a major construction project and really altering the right of way. So we chose to do a bike lane going on one side of the road where we had that limited opportunity. So it's not perfect, right? You don't have crosswalks on both, or, the sidewalk on both sides, 2 bike lanes, all that stuff. But we try to accommodate or what we can to meet all the needs in that corridor. So again, I feel like the complete streets policy, the charge of this committee sort of informs, again, the decision-making that we have here. And then lastly, I didn't type it up and I apologize, but the new adjusted charge, which I think I spoke to, with one exception of we're still talking about the pilot. Trying to stop sharing. With the exception of the pilot, the select board chose not to withdraw funds out of the pilot program. I did confirm with Apex, and we have until November to make a decision on that grant, whether or not we move forward with it. I think the rationale overall was if, and this is not a requirement, if we were to do 2 of the 3 projects, you may want to do a pilot. And both of those 2 items, the relatively speaking, adjusted version of what Apex already presented and sort of a moderate solution would both potentially meet the requirements of that grant. So, I think part of the discussions of this committee, and I don't have a clear answer on this, and neither did the Apex, but do we want to do a pilot? Is that something, I think initially that was seen as a value add to do something with limited cost and see how people responded to it. It seems to be one of the things that people responded the most negatively to be perfectly frank. And so the question is, whatever option that the town chooses to pursue, do we want to do a pilot in order to mimic it? Or do we want to just go through a typical concept design construction process?
I don't think people had a problem with it. So
Yeah, no, well.
I don't think people had a problem with the pilot per se. That wasn't the reaction. The reaction was what the change was.
Yeah,
It wasn't a pilot, it was what the change was.
I wouldn't throw the baby out with the
Yeah,
bathwater. You know,
Yeah.
pilot
So,
something
for
good.
example, the question was, you're saying 2 of the 3 may qualify. The grant money, that was based on bike lanes, correct? Multiple lanes.
It had to be
No,
quick.
in road diet,
One lane.
general road diet.
a
Which
general
the
road. So
2
but it
items
was-
would accomplish.
Hold on, but it was a road diet with, hold on, no, not necessarily. Okay. It was a road diet with bike lanes, so multiple lanes, correct? Multiple bike lanes.
Mhm.
Okay, so that means, so again, 2 out of those 3, it isn't just a road diet. They both would still have to have bike lanes on either side in order to qualify for the grant money, correct?
Which we believe you could, if you wanted to, accomplish with 2 of those 3 designs.
So I think I've heard both things. I've heard like a lot of support for the concept of the pilot, because once people found out like, wait, this isn't a permanent change, it's a pilot, there's a lot of like relief, just as like a public resident member and like talking to people of the public. Equally, I have also heard the pilot makes them nervous because in this world that we're living in, and just whether it's like tariffs or people are spending less, spending less money in business, but like there's equally like this is another disruption that causes uncertainty. So I just want to acknowledge that I'm not saying one is, it's the and statement. People love the concept that it's just a pilot, and it has been expressed to me that it's just another layer of like change and uncertainty and like what does this mean, or how. And so I think on that one it's more about that criteria again, which is like, how do you adjust things throughout the pilot? So if like everything is bad, you don't just say, well, sorry, the pilot's a year, and even if it's bad after 3 weeks, we're stuck with it. Just like, how do we build in that criteria or those like quick fixes throughout a pilot?
And I just want to be clear, if we were to go with the modified to 2021 plan, there would be no change to like a pilot wouldn't necessarily make sense because you're not really modifying that much.
But we're potentially not gonna know which way we wanna go until after the fall.
Right,
Right?
so this is the
so-
struggle as far as November goes for a deadline.
Liz?
Yeah, thank you, Karis. That's exactly it. We can't make a decision about moving forward with the pilot until we have the 3 plans, until we figure out what the public wants and what we're gonna move forward with. So it may be dead in the water in terms of that timeline. And also, have we used any of the money from the grant already?
No,
Thanks.
How much is the grant?
so the grant is for $320,000. The town would have to match at $80,000. The pilot, it's a demonstration grant, so it's basically we have a plan. We want to know if people like it. That's really the question. It's not, will it work? It's, will people like it? Because those are 2 different questions. And so the goal was to demonstrate what a road diet would look like. We could pursue a pilot without a grant, right? We could pursue a pilot with a grant, or we could not pursue a pilot. I think there are multiple options, but there is a timeline associated with this. And this particular grant, if we were to pilot, requires bike lanes for a pilot. If we were to do it on our own, it wouldn't necessarily, but I have been told by the consultants, Jackie has a little bit of experience with doing demonstrations. Doing bike lanes in a pilot is the easiest possible demonstration because you don't have to deal with ADA compliance for the areas that you're Jersey burying off that don't connect to the sidewalk. Right, so if you have the sidewalk up here and the bike lane down here, you don't have to do all that much because you're not meeting an ADA requirement. If you want to make that pedestrian space, outdoor dining, something else that would be lovely, it just either requires decking to bring the grade up, or it requires several ramps, right, to make it accessible the whole way. So what we've talked with Apex about is that you can do a pilot with bike lanes, you can do a pilot without bike lanes. A pilot without bike lanes is just a little bit more involved.
I believe at one of the last meetings was, the question was, the grant was written for that road diet bike lanes. And the question was, can a grant be written for something different?
We will not get funding for a grant that's written for something different.
Okay.
All the grants are really, because,
I understand.
yeah, the grants are really to promote specific things that they're looking to implement. And I think I've said before, but depending on how this project gets funded and how we move forward, and I think it's gonna depend on how much it costs, to be honest. Accessibility of grant funding from the state and the federal government will also likely require bike lanes.
If the money is rejected, is there a scenario that this project just like wouldn't just?
No, I don't think so. Again, I think it's back to the question, which are 2 different questions, is do you pilot a project?
Okay.
Or do you just do a traditional process?
Okay.
And then if you choose to pilot the process, we'll have to decide, do we use Chapter 90 funding? Do we seek a warrant at town meeting, which I think was something I'd heard of? Or, you know, do we seek a different grant opportunity potentially? So I don't think that deciding in November to not move forward or move forward conditions the project. Because I think we're working internally on what our deadlines are for infrastructure failure. I think that will also condition the project a little bit as well, because when we go in to repair the infrastructure, it doesn't make sense to leave it the way
So
that it is.
infrastructure is the drainage.
The drainage and the pavement condition,
Are we doing water and sewer?
we will be double checking. I think the water and sewer in that area is on the newer, I'm saying newer because our water system is over 100 years old.
Right.
It's on the newer side and more than adequate to meet the needs of that area.
What was the town match one more time? I'm sorry.
$80,000.
Oh,
But I know in the 2017 project, that there wasn't any, prototype.
Yeah, we didn't pilot it, we just did it.
Okay, and so the next agenda item is to determine the project work over the summer, which I guess we kind of talked about a little bit.
Yeah, I think the question is the select board, I think, had sort of asked, did we want to meet or not
Yeah.
over the summer? I wanted to have this meeting honestly because I wanted to get the meeting minutes formalized and approved and posted, and get the meeting together. I will say they did add an additional member to the committee. The select board will not meet to validate or to find, if they find somebody, they will not meet to appoint somebody to the committee before our next meeting is scheduled in July. So I think there was a question from my perspective, did we want to meet in July knowing that we will have another committee member coming on board?
I mean,
How many does that bring the committee to?
16.
I would say that we have,
Even
I mean,
number?
first of all, we've filled the existing areas. So I would, it would seem to me that if Apex will potentially have any information, feedback, any of that, or if there are other things that are even related to some of the discussions about the regulations or things like that, that we keep the discussion going so that we keep the momentum of, of that input, because one person is not going to change the opinion of the entire committee. There'll be great input as they come on. But we can do, I think, important work by continuing on, even if they haven't been appointed.
What's the seat?
Business seat.
Oh, no, there's me. So wait, are you asking if we meet?
So I guess my question is, should we meet in July? Because I won't have plans from, like, it
Well,
wouldn't
no.
make sense to have Apex necessarily participate, because we
Right.
won't have any changes in concept
Yeah, but
plans
what
to
about
look
this
at.
criteria and some other things?
And that may be what we discuss.
Would we have plans for the 2021?
You wanted to like take a look at that?
Yeah, I mean, if we had it out on a sheet of paper,
Yes, agreed.
just to see where we are, and then we at least did
Blown
that,
up
keep
one.
momentum. And as we see the other options, we understand the baseline.
Yeah, I
So
think
Karen,
that'd be
can you just,
really
I guess, what would we be discussing then in July if we don't have plans? That seems like what we're waiting for, correct? Like really to get moving forward with whatever we're gonna do, we need plans. Yes.
Well, the 2021 plans.
Right, but they're not, those, it's not gonna be the same. Correct, right, it's not gonna be the same thing. So I guess it's just like, why wouldn't we wait for the plans to then meet? I don't know.
So I guess the only thing I heard was that, do we have the time, do we then take that time to brainstorm what our sort of metrics are for evaluation? Like what would, different plans are gonna have benefits and drawbacks, and how could we kind of equate them? And so, if we're doing it on number of parking spaces or, on-street parking spaces, if we're doing it on distance of pedestrian crossing, if we're doing it on bikeability, are we doing it on width of sidewalk? And so that way, when we get the concept plans, we can kind of say, this is stronger on these elements, this is stronger on those elements. So we have a way of evaluating them against each other. I think that was the only one item that I think I'd heard.
Yeah.
Okay, I think that's fine, but I don't think that there's any point in bringing a 2020 or 2021 plan to the table. It doesn't make sense if that's not what we're gonna be using moving forward.
I can certainly send it around if people want to take a look at it as well, just to see, because I think you had said it's not the do nothing plan, and actually that is accurate. There are some changes that had to be made into the corridor that were made that might be worth looking
It
at.
would be good to send it around.
Yeah, and just for ideas, it might be ultimately.
Should we get a
lot?
Yeah.
We're gonna
Yes,
discuss it. It should
everyone
be
wants
like
a large
attached
printout.
to
I know.
Well, yeah.
our
well,
meetings
plus
as
the fact
a
that-
packet, so
Yeah,
that
yeah.
people know
because-
that that's what we're looking at.
I think-
and discussing.
I think one of the things Kevin was asking for specifically was, when we look at plans, and I've noticed this when I talk to the select board as well, like, when you look at it in 8x11, it's almost impossible to know
Right.
what it is
Yeah.
you're even looking at. So I think we're looking
Yeah.
for like a
Blow it up.
role plan.
Okay, so one suggestion, but then you also could take the latest one from the
Yep.
hearing.
Yep.
And then we could talk about criteria,
Yep.
but just use it as a reference
Yeah.
Yeah.
point of like, what do we mean?
Yep.
And that can help, but I agree, like having some sort of criteria, so that then when we get the 3 plans, we can all look at, like, wait, from different perspectives, what do each of these plans like do, and understand what that criteria is would be huge. But if you do it while you already are looking at plans, it's harder, because then you're just focused on
Right.
like what you see.
Sorry, I don't mean to prolong the meeting, but just one of the major things I heard sitting through all this input from the public is communication. And so I just want to remind the working group that we also need to make sure that whatever we're doing, we collectively are communicating, we're having conversations outside of here with people that are asking, but also communicating the context of how this working group came to a decision. And I do agree with Jackie, and I think Jackie said it perfectly, that two opposing things can exist in the same space. And so by this committee, or this working group rather, by the working group setting criteria on how you're going to move a concept forward, is that needs to be communicated to the public so that they understand that this wasn't just, that the decisions weren't just made of like, hey, this is the plan, we're rolling with this, and also that when this comes to the public and the public gets the input, whatever that time frame looks like in the fall, late summer, wherever that is that the public understands, to your point, Jackie, is that there can be opposing interests living in the same space.
Yeah.
And that this is about a balance and harmony for the entire community and not just one group, whether that be cyclists, whether that be businesses, whether that be pedestrians. Like, it's about bringing a harmony and a balance that benefits the community or Needham as a whole. And I really do think that's something that the working group needs to consider with communication and making sure that you're clear with saying that to the public, because the public needs to understand that this working group exists for a reason, and that those are the decisions that you're pushing forward to those public meetings.
And that being said, I think it's important that we can all be here in July, because I know it came up at the select board meeting that they talked about demolishing this committee because there was never a forum. It was only a forum once. And I know it's been people coming in, I came in very late. But I also think it's important that if we're gonna do this, that we all commit to it, or at least have a forum.
So July 16th was the date.
Yep.
So that's still
That works.
works for everyone here. We at least have a quorum. Liz is giving the thumbs up. Liz, no, that's a shake of the head, no.
We're
Okay.
celebrating our 110th anniversary. Some of you might be there that night.
Oh, that is that night.
Paula.
I know, I'm looking at the conflict right now.
I can make July 16th, I'm good with that.
What
I
time
can
is
do
the,
What time is it? Yeah, sorry, Liz.
Our event is 5:30 to 7:30, but I'm at the event probably starting at 4.
Wait, can we hold them at the same location?
I know, right? We're sold out. We're at capacity, but I'm just one person. So if you have quorum,
we can do, it sounds like enough people will probably be here, and we can.
I can certainly send an
confirm
email
that
out and just
before.
take a, it was like the same thing. We didn't know there was gonna be a finance committee meeting tonight,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So, yeah.
And, okay.
Okay.
Hearing that, I will,
Motion to adjourn.
So it's just Lisa and I that won't be here.
and the other people who aren't here, we don't know. So we'll find out.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll send around,
I do the poll.
yeah, well, something.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Are we talking about August 13th too?
What's the August date?
It was just on the agenda, it's on there.
August 13th, yeah.
I am good with that.
Do we want to decide in the July meeting if we want to continue on August, or if we want to take a pause till September, depending on like what information we have at the
Let's
time?
do
Good idea.
I'll have a better idea. I don't think we have the revised scope yet from Apex. Is that right? So I'll have a better idea of where we are with that when we meet in July.
Also, just make a suggestion that it's always better to plan for like more, like, and don't say like, oh, the meeting could be shorter, just like we've all budgeted 2 hours, we set those dates, and then
Okay.
I would say like keep those two, then for the
Yes,
next 2
yeah.
meetings, because if people think they can make other plans, like I also think from the communication, if we show we're working,
Mhm.
like, these are public meetings, people can now, or people are gonna watch the Zooms, like, yeah, it'll just create.
Where it's gonna be harder is September and October, because the Large House Review Committee, we're gonna have a couple of meetings starting September, October. The planning board, we're gonna have to have something coming up at some point, probably something with Muzzy, Carter, maybe yes, maybe no. The tree committee will have something, probably another one coming up, so that'll be the harder time to try to
We'll get
negotiate. a time.
Another member, and then
Yeah.
we'll kind of flush out what date works best for
Do we need 9
those
then?
16 people.
We'll need 9 then, right? Yeah.
So,
So
okay.
are we saying yes to July 16th,
Yes to July
August 6th
Yep.
and 13th, or
Uh,
maybe
Can't
a
hold it.
poll to see.
Maybe August 13th. Well,
Tentative
discuss.
for August 13th.
We'll-
Hold it, but we may not need it.
We
Yeah.
may decide in July what we do in August, and I would say maybe in July, try to get some brainstorming on what dates might work, moving into the fall. Like I completely hear everybody on the struggle of getting together a bunch of people who are highly civically involved and also on a lot of other committees, so.
If people can't make the 16th and we're talking about criteria, is the 13th another time for people to participate in that criteria? Because it would also feel funny to try to make some decisions without everyone's input.
Well, so we're at a quorum.
Got it, well, yeah.
Quorum.
All right.
Okay,
So the
the
motion,
motion.
second is.
Second.
Second.
Okay, so we'll take a roll call vote. Kevin Keen.
Aye.
All good?
Aye.
Paula Jacobson.
Aye.
Marty Crocker.
Aye.
Danielle Mandy.
Here, yes.
Jackson DeWolf.
Here, yeah.
Avery Newton. Chair votes aye. Lisa Elcock
Aye.
and Liz Hay.
Aye.
Motion's adjourned. Meeting's